My name is Preet Ola, and I'm the Associate Dean of Research at Schulich. I'll be hosting the webinar and moderating the question and answer session. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we'll start with some brief introductions. This will be followed by the formal presentation from a speaker who has given a taste of great music that we have heard. So we look forward to hearing from her. Thereafter, we will take your questions. Please submit your questions anytime during the presentation and the Q&A session. The session will end with some concluding remarks from the speaker and us. So now it gives me great pleasure in introducing today's speaker, Professor Irene Henriques. Professor Henriques is a professor of sustainability and economics and area coordinator of economics at the Schulich School of Business. She is also a distinguished visiting star professor at EGADE Business School, that's in Monterrey Tech in Mexico, and former co-editor of the journal Business and Society. Her research interests span economics, stakeholder management, and sustainability. She's held numerous leadership positions outside Schulich, including the chair of the Joint Public Advisory Committee to the US, Canadian, and Mexican environmental ministers under NAFTA. Today, Professor Henriques will speak about the economic impact of COVID-19 over the last couple of months and the role of government, businesses, NGOs, and citizens must play in getting us through the crisis. She has also promised to predict the future. So with this, I'll turn it over to Irene.
Oh, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. Excellent. Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be here. It's definitely something that I've been looking forward to for a while now. And what I want to talk about today is the economic impact of the pandemic. And yes, people do matter. So I'm going to concentrate more on the people side of it. So the agenda for today is first we're going to look at the big picture, the pandemic, and then the economic part. Both are very important because they actually go together. Policy, how have the Bank of Canada and the federal government responded in leading us through this crisis? And finally, I'm going to conclude with restarting the economy, what the future may look like. Now, this is all quite uncertain right now, but I think everyone is eager to see into a crystal ball, see what life may look like in the future. So I'm going to give some predictions based on some of the research I've done, but also on some of the what people are saying about this. So first is the pandemic, the big picture. This is not our first pandemic, nor will it be our last. The infectiousness of the disease is also called what you call the R0, or the reproduction number. For the flu is 1.5, for Ebola is 2, measles 16, smallpox 6, and COVID is about 2.5. Now we have vaccinations for the measles, for the smallpox. As you can see, we've had these big pandemics across time. And Matthias Kipping has given an amazing webinar on this topic about the history of pandemics and their impact. So one of the things that urban economists have looked at is they said that urbanization, rising global connections and interactions and population increases, which put more and more pressure on the environment and the natural environment, are driving some of these modern pandemics. We're going into areas where we didn't go before. We're dealing in viruses from animals to humans are passing. So these are the things that are very, are happening as we speak. So this is the cause, if you will, if you wish. Now where we are is right here, okay? And you say, well, that's not too much, but it is significant. So we have to think about that. So let's move on now to the economic side. What's the economic picture given this event? So let's talk about employment in Canada. In February, before the event, in February 2020, about 19.2 million people were employed. But in April, we lost about 2 million people, bringing cumulative employment losses to about 3 million, which is significant. That means that our unemployment rate went up to went up to 2.5 million, and we have an employment rate that increased to 13%. And if you include people who are looking for work, who would be, right, who would be looking for work, that you don't count that, it would be 17.8%. And so that is a huge number. It's also spreading now to other industries. Usually what you see if people are not buying goods and services and consumption goes down, goods and services industries would be most effective. It has now passed along to construction and the manufacturing industries. And therefore we lost another 581,000 jobs as well. And in March, February 2020, the total number of work hours also went down. So it's not only the fact that people, they may be working, but now they're working with reduced hours. So that is also an issue. So all this says that we have people are losing their jobs, and therefore they need some help. So it is about people. And then of course they work for businesses, and then they consume less. So it's this vicious circle that occurs. So what do we do during this period? And that's what I'm going to turn to in a few minutes. I want to now do an exercise with you. So I'm going to ask Vito to put up our first poll. And the question is, how have your expenditures changed since mid-March 2020? Can you please fill out the poll now and submit? The options are, there has been no change, 1 to 10% reduction in expenditures, 11 to 25% reduction in your expenditures. So once you submit, I'm going to move ahead, but I'm going to give you maybe 30 seconds to submit your answers. And I want everyone to answer this question, please. So now consumption in Canada represents approximately 78.5% of GDP. The nominal GDP in 2019 was approximately $1.99 trillion. Vito, can you present the answers to the question, please? Oh my goodness, 61% said 11 to 25% reduction in their expenditures. And that's just a small sample of people who are listening to this webinar. Thank you very much, Vito. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you would have said 10% decrease in consumption, ceteris paribus, which means assuming no other changes, this would result in an 8% decrease in GDP. But you, my friends, said close to 25% decrease in consumption, ceteris paribus, would result in a 22% decrease in GDP. And this is simply just the initial impact. So the longer this goes on, that's very disconcerting, because as consumers, we're concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. So if I know I'm not going to have an income tomorrow, I will save now, I will hold back. So how does this reflect insofar as consumption is concerned? Well, let's take a look at this. Year-over-year change in credit card spending. Isn't that significant? It's huge. Now, what's interesting here is in Canada, what they found out is our debt is about 177.1. That's we as consumers. And that includes mortgage debt as well as credit card debt. So that means for every $1 that we get in revenue, we spend $1.77. So this may be the light behind the tunnel. You know, a little light there that this may make us rethink, maybe to save a bit more. I don't know. I'm giving some positives here. As consumption goes down, so do prices. Right here, this is a reflection on prices coming down. This one here, includes oil prices. That's why it went down. And this is due to Russia and Saudi Arabia having their little dispute regarding the price of oil in general. And I think that's resolved a little bit somewhat. So this may be going up a little bit more. And then on the other side, what about the economic? Now, this is a widespread economic downturn. This is not like 2008, 2009, where it hit the financial sector and then sort of spread out in the housing sector, which had impacts on others. This is really widespread. This is really what you call a widespread, because we're asked to stay home, we're asked to close enterprises, we're asked to do this. And so as a result, the most hard-hit industries, especially in Canada, are oil and gas, mining, transportation, especially the airlines, leisure and hospitality, anything to do with travel, hotels, casinos, and even if you want to go travel on by boat, employment services, retail, except for groceries, because that's been shut down. Industries experiencing some benefits include the telecommunications and IT, media services. And the telecommunications and IT is because people now are trying to pivot. Small businesses are now trying to figure out ways in order to do better or to change their business, and because they can't do it. People can't come into their business, then they're going to bring their business to other people. And this is really interesting, and this is what Eileen Fisher on Tuesday talked about, and also Jeff Kistrak, and then Mr. Card. Everything was a wonderful talk on that. We also see media services. Netflix is a huge right now. Internet retail is actually quite popular, and so is essential retail. There's a bit of benefit to banking and finance for people who are troubled by the markets and they want to know what they can do. So there's some financial services going there. Public health services, also extremely important. As you see, that the services are required, and government services as well. They're extremely busy, many of them working from home, dealing with all these issues. So what about the real estate side? On the real estate side, this is a presentation of the February 2020 building permits. As you can see already in 2020, and this is a leading indicator, building permits, already we saw that the real estate side, this was actually decreasing across Canada. The big bright spots, of course, were Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Northwest Territories. There must have been some mining projects or something going on there. And what we see is that that construction had been falling prior to COVID-19. The crisis will negatively impact the construction sector. Interesting, large cities around the world, we've seen rental rates fall. And that's because one of the repercussions of people not traveling is that now these Airbnb units are now coming online to long-term rentals. I'm not sure if this is happening here in Toronto or Vancouver. And this is a huge research opportunity to see pre and post what happens and what the changes are in this rental market. Already anecdotal evidence suggests, like in places like Paris, in Rome, etc., that the rental prices are coming down for long-term rentals. And I know James Clayton will be presenting something on cities. And that is a huge issue. And I would encourage everyone to look for Professor Clayton's talk on cities, which would be fascinating. Now, what about the government response to COVID-19? And that's the next thing that we need to look at. Clearly, the problem is significant. People are losing their jobs. A lot of people have lost their jobs. And the US is a prime example where nearly, I think 35 million people have already, in the last few weeks, have already registered for unemployment benefits. And during a typical recession, the Bank of Canada, which does monetary policy, and there's the Canadian government that does fiscal policy, they use a policy to get people to work. And this is called stimulus policy. But this is not the case here. We're not talking about stimulus. What we're talking about is relief. During a pandemic, people are asked to stay at home. Businesses are asked to shut their doors. There's a reduction in output and income. So this is relief. And once the pandemic's over, maybe we'll talk about stimulus and getting people to work. But this here is important. It's relief. It's trying to get safety, trying to make people feel safe. And hopefully when this starts easing, as soon as they feel safe, they'll go back to work. They'll feel safe to go back to work. So what has the government done? The first thing they've done is of course, on the monetary side, is the Bank of Canada has reduced interest rates 3 times to 0.25%. So what this does is now you see interest rates are low, the likelihood of you going to borrow money, the price will be low, you will borrow money. Now that it's already very low, so the impact is not as great. But one thing they have done, which is really important, is the large-scale purchase of government and corporate bonds. And the buying of the corporate bonds and even the large-scale and provincial bonds is actually quite new. And that's what you call quantitative easing. So when they buy a bond, they actually give you the money. And that's the money that's going to be used to help these corporations, in this case, the provinces, and also the federal government. That's how money gets into the system, and that's one way of doing it. The other thing is loosening of credit policy by the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. What's interesting here is that they've lowered this, so that they have basically allowed this sort of stability fund, they lowered the rate, and so that has released $300 billion into the banking system for them to lend out to businesses and consumers and households. Now, they'd be very clear, the OSFI has said, the banks cannot use this to increase their pay, they can't use this for buybacks or to give money in dividends, right? So they're very clear what this is. So really there is some concern about this, because politically there's also politics involved, and that's important to understand as well. Now, what about on the fiscal side? On the fiscal side, $207 billion relief package. This has actually gone up to $280 billion because they've added a student portion to it, and also an elderly relief package as well. But that's all brand new, and I'll talk a little bit about this. The first one is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, also the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and also EI. What's wonderful is Professor Amin Mawani has actually spoken about this last month. So I would ask you to take a look at his webinar on this topic. And he basically compared all three and says which one would be best to take if you had an option. So I would look at that. The next one, of course, is the temporary salary top-up for low-income and essential workers. So, for example, if people were working at Loblaws or any grocery store, they saw their wages go up. And one of the reasons they went up is they took advantage of this temporary salary top-up for those workers who are essentially our essential workers. Very important. There's also the mortgage deferral, up to 6 months between homeowner and lender. That's between homeowner and lender. So this is not really, but the government's encouraging is the banks to be open to this. So you go to your bank and you ask them, can I hold off? I can't pay these next couple of months. And they'll say, fine, we'll make an arrangement, but then you'll have to pay interest and it will go into your principal. So these are the negotiations that are had. They're not going to forgive your debt, but they are going to help you out during this period. Now, the one important thing is the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. This is new, which should open up tomorrow on the website. And what they're going to do is help students, because many jobs that students would be taking this summer are not going to be available. For example, the CNE has now been canceled. Restaurants are closed, and we don't know how long. And there'll be maybe, if they do open, they'll maybe have 50% capacity, depending on this. As a result, these student jobs, these typical student jobs won't be available. And they know about this. And this is very important. So what they're going to do is for students who qualify, is give $1,250 a month for the next 4 months. So that's May, June, July, and August. And hopefully that'll help them, because when students go back to school, they need to pay tuition, and that'll be something they'll need. And they'll also give $2,000 for those who are also have dependents. For those, and so that system. And what's really good about all of these programs is that they're actually quite easy to apply for. If you qualify, you'll get the money right away and right into your bank. And that's something that's very different from other countries. And that's what I think a lot of people are grateful for. Now, the policy is only as strong as your weakest link. And that's something we have to realize. The pandemic has exposed the cracks in our society, and such as income inequality and the digital divide. Brent Lyons is going to be speaking to the issues of of inequality in general in the workplace. So I would encourage you, I think it's going to be next week, to listen to his talk. And the digital divide is actually quite real. And the digital divide means that there are people who don't have access to the internet and to high-speed internet. This is quite important if you're saying, I'm going to put everything online especially for students, high school students, elementary school students. If they live in an area where they can't, their parents also have to depend on this for their work, and their children, everyone, and that's not available. that's going to create a digital divide. And this, what's interesting about the pandemic is that at least it shines light on this. So when we do go back, how do we make our country more resilient? How do we deal with issues of income inequality? How do we rectify the digital divide? Interesting questions to ask. Also, getting resources to people who need it the most is very critical. Examples include low-income households, the homeless, women and children fleeing violence. When more and more people are at home and tensions are high, these things happen. So if they existed before, it's only going to make things worse. So it's very important that there's systems in place that we take that into account. The elderly, indigenous communities, post-secondary students, and also small businesses. And so these are the things that the government right now are looking to. They're putting money into the indigenous communities, $205 million for indigenous communities to help elders, to help with mental health. Secondary students now are getting some money from that Canadian benefit plan. Small businesses as well. We saw from Eileen Fisher's talk and her team, they talked about how small businesses are getting also some support from the government at all levels. Now, the COVID-19 crisis has also laid bare the socioeconomic cracks in every country. So it's not only our country, but also look at the US. What happens is in the US, usually your healthcare is tied to your job. So as people lose their jobs, they also lose their healthcare coverage that they had before. So once that happens, they have to scramble to get it, another type of healthcare coverage. And then they don't have the income. So it's really creating a lot more stress. So I am very grateful I live in a country that has a universal healthcare system. And some African countries where there are weak social safety nets, example, Ghana, people need to choose between hunger and health. So one thing that's really people are considering and others are considering is what should we do about this? That we have to build these safety nets as well in the poorest countries of the world. So I have two more important questions, okay? So I'm going to now ask you to do something for me. Can you please go to www.menti.com and use the code 158880 and answer my question. How long can you manage without a paycheck? Thank you. Oh, interesting. Okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to know who you are. You can answer be as honest as you want. So we're seeing that a majority, at least so far, is about 2 months, okay? Some 1 month, 2 weeks, some can't at all, depending on the situation. And that is exactly what we're seeing. Some of the people who are choosing to work because they have to, and this is happening around the world as well. But 2 months is not that long. And so now, thank you very much for this. Now I'm going to ask you another question. Now, this what's interesting. Oh, you're still answering. Continue answering because I'll come back to this. Now the next question. Should large companies get government COVID funding? This is fascinating. I could tell I'm dealing with a business audience. Okay. So what we're seeing here is clearly the majority says it depends, right? It depends what they're facing. It depends maybe if they're publicly traded. And if they have publicly traded, they may have other options of getting equity. A good example, for example, Shake Shack, that restaurant in the US, applied for money. And then all of a sudden, what happened? They got, say, how can you apply for money when these small businesses really need the money, right? And so when it became public, so the governments are clearly, and even companies are saying, okay, what are our options here? And that's why it depends is a good answer, because it depends on what the options are available. Some larger companies have lots of debt. The airline industry, for example. Do we want an airline industry to go bankrupt? I don't know. What are the options? So these are the things that politically, when we talk about economics and politics, that it is much easier to give money to people, individuals, than it is to give money to companies. Because in giving money to companies, you have to decide the size, small, medium, large, the type of industry. Do I give money to the oil industry? Do I not? What about issues with regards to were they in trouble before or not? So countries, for example, like Denmark, say, I will give money to companies only if you've paid taxes in this country, right? So if you're say a Danish company, but you pay taxes in another country, in that tax haven, then I'm not going to help you because I'm using tax dollars. So all these questions are going on. It's also economic and political, but this is very real because we're dealing with taxpayers' money. And as you have to build that confidence that they feel that you're building the economy together. Thank you very much for answering this question. So restarting the economy. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. That's by Gandhi, who said this. And basically, there's some realities. Dr. Tam says that Canadians need to prepare for living with COVID-19 as the epidemic curve flattens and the provinces sort of slowly reopen. But there's also a cost of staying closed. But there's also a cost of reopening too quickly. The faster you reopen, the lower the economic cost, but the higher the human costs. So implicitly, when we're doing this, we're making that decision, and we have to be aware of that. So we have the scientists on one end, the economists and businesses on the other, and somehow we have to have this understanding of how do we, as a group, as a society, move together while safeguarding the weakest of ours and safeguarding ourselves in doing this. So the US has the highest COVID-19 cases globally, reporting 1.4 million cases and more than 82,000 deaths. New models predict 134,000 people could die in the US by August from the virus. So what we're seeing is we know our largest neighbors having difficulties controlling that. So there's questions then, what about the border? What about goods and people traveling between these borders? And what can we do? Those are the realities right now that the governments and even our society is facing. So what will the future look like? Well, I have another poll for you. Vito, can you please post it up, please? Do you believe this pandemic is a one-shot event? Yes or no? Very simple. Vito, can you post the answers now? You're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. All right. Oh, great. All right. So if the answer is no, which it was, many scientists believe that such events will only get worse with climate change. Then, what does that mean? Well, people will demand a more supportive safety net, basic income guarantee. Now, what is that? Well, believe it or not, the Ontario government was piloting this in 2018. And what happened was, and what this is they were giving some communities in Brantford, Thunder Bay, etc., and they were testing. They had one group that received a minimum guarantee and another group that did not. And then what they were doing is determining what the best solution was. So this is not welfare. This is really looking at how this helps the household, how this helps mental health, how this helps families in increasing their social welfare and increasing their mental capacity, helping the household build together. And it was amazing exercise. A host of researchers got together, economists, sociologists, psychologists, looking into this wonderful pilot exercise. And unfortunately, the Ford government stopped it before, so that all the data can be collected. But through the grapevine, I heard that it had amazing results. And if you think about it, what we're receiving right now is some sort of basic income right now for many people who are unable to work. So it'll be interesting that I'm hoping that people will start analyzing this, looking at this, do a pilot series look at this issue, especially as jobs are changing and it's not clear that all jobs will be coming back. Also, we need greater physical, mental health supports to make it more resilient. Economists and businesses are great at efficiency. We're great at just in time, making things like that. You know, everything is great. We're reducing costs, increasing revenues. But resiliency doesn't necessarily mean that. One organization that's viewed as resilience is, of course, what you call the military, right? Because they have to look at all different options. And so they have to be prepared for this. And that preparedness is what makes us resilient. And so this is what the difference is. So it'd be interesting to look at how do we make our physical and mental health supports to make the whole system more resilient. A tax system that supports such initiatives. We need to think about how our tax system works. And something that we have to consider, because we're going to be establishing a lot of debt. After World War II, we had a lot of debt. What do we do about this? And it will be resolved. It's not going to be an issue. Everyone's going to have a lot of debt, every country. The question is how do we address it slowly across time? But we need to do this in order to actually move forward. The other thing is the World Bank. There's a push for the IMF and the World Bank to cancel poor countries' debt. And the nature of work, what does work mean? Will it change? Companies are looking to experiment with hybrid work models. And I know people have already talked, Winnie has talked about this idea of the work and how and how employees will come and how they work from home. There's a behavioral economist, Dan Ariely from Duke University, and he's actually looking at all these factors on the impact of COVID on behavior. How do we convince people to do the best thing in order to help the community in general? We have witnessed the value of essential workers. What does value mean? All right. In some cases, we pay people not based on the value of their work. And so people are now rethinking this and thinking how important some of these jobs are. And also, how do we interact with people? And how is that going to change across organizations? When going back, what does that mean? Going back to the university, for example. Are we going to do social distancing? Are we going to have small classes? These are all the questions we're asking. There are costs and benefits to all of these things. But we know that we have to innovate. We have to think about this. And even small businesses and everything, they have to think about, what does that mean coming back? What does my organization look like when I get back? These are all questions that are going to be asked. And I'm hoping we'll have the opportunity, as we stay home right now, to think about this. Now, questions.
Thanks, Irene. That was really great. So there are a few questions, but I want to start with something that you mentioned. And we seem to be seeing a lot of these dichotomy, looking at the pandemic. You kind of mentioned, or alluded to hunger versus health. We are also hearing about more broadly lives versus livelihoods. So what is your thought on kind of looking at this from this either or kind of thinking?
Well, that's really interesting because when you look at that, I mean, economists actually do a cost-benefit analysis of these things and say, what should we do? But I think when you're looking at this more seriously, the question has to be, if we open too quickly, then what happens? We can't pull it back as quickly, right? So how do we think this out? How do we look at this insofar as what are the costs not only to the institutions, but the people? So we, as citizens, are responsible. Our employers are responsible to keep us safe. So there's corporate social responsibility on the citizen side, on the company side, and also on the whole system. And so this is what's going to be interesting. And Dirk alluded to this, that what does that mean? How responsible are we? Who are we responsible to? And right now we're going to say, well, responsible to everyone. If I know I'm not feeling well, I will not go out. And then the question is, how do we sort of think about this? What are the costs? And right now they're weighing on this. For example, in indigenous communities in the Navajo, they block the roads to say, who are you? Why are you coming? I'm going to trace you. Because if something happens, the cost to them, they lost 90% of their people due to the smallpox in the 1500s, right? When the Europeans came to North America. So as a result, they're very much aware. So we need to put the tracing systems in, and these are going to have costs. But it's the way that we're going to come in to talk about it. So the costs are, a human life is important, but if we know this, then we should do something. We should be responsible and think about how we can do this.
Okay, thanks. So there are a couple of questions on the relief aspect of the government response. So there's a question from Greg Fidel who asks, how will we be expected to repay these large fiscal policy measures like CERB? Yeah. Will this result in increased taxes for consumers once we return to normalcy?
That is always, that's the big question everyone's asking. And what we have to understand is that as the economy starts ramping up, we will pay through our own taxes. There is going to be an issue during World War II, what they did for the huge debt, is they actually put the bit more of a burden on the top 1% to pay a little bit more. Companies may be asked to pay a little bit more in order to do this. Now, it's going to be temporary. It's going to be that during World War II was temporary, and then they resolved it, and then it came up. But this is going to be an issue that is going to be the case for every single country. But as citizens, we have to accept the fact that if we didn't do that, if we had no social safety nets, then it would be in the 1930s, right? And then it would be worse. So what we're saying is that we're providing this safety net, then the economy will build. We'll be able to, as the economy rises, we'll be able to collect that revenue. And yes, there will be a temporary increase in taxes sometime along the road. But I don't think it's going to be as large as people think. It will happen. So the money is going to be coming into the system, and it'll be fine. I think that we have to accept that this is what every country is living in, and that we all have to take responsibility for it.
So there's a related question, but a broader question from Maite Cubas Diaz, who writes, I'm Spanish, so I would like to know your expert thoughts on the measures the Spanish government has put in place. Their measures have the objective to help the most vulnerable, but are getting a lot of criticism, mostly from the right-wing parties, showing the continuous war between left and right-wing parties in Spain. Do you think these measures are appropriate?
They are. I mean, the reality is the cracks in the system are very real. I mean, what happens is the pandemic has exposed it. And the helping the most vulnerable, whether the people who are older or people who are homeless, is that what they want to say is that if we don't help them, how are we going to eventually, when things get worse, help ourselves? It's our responsibility to do that. So it's really unfortunate that these divides are happening. And what I've written a paper on this whole, the social media and all the noise that's going on out there. And sometimes it's to distract on the facts. I mean, and when helping the most vulnerable is not costing that much, believe it or not. So if you look at it as a proportion of all the money that is going out, but helping that, giving that dollar to that person is going to be the best dollar well spent in sort of helping that area, that community, and decreasing the spread within that community. And so I think that it's really unfortunate that they're receiving that criticism. But even in Canada, Trudeau is receiving lots of criticism as well. I mean, I was on Twitter, and there's a lot of criticism just saying, you're not giving enough, or you're giving too much. And my view is that, talk to people who are in need and who are experiencing the unemployment, especially the women, single mothers, etc. Those are people who are usually are in the front lines. So they do need the help, and that is unfortunate.
So there's a question from Derek Jones, whose question is, how probable do you consider it to be that we may see negative interest rates in Canada? And if so, how do you see this impacting our new normal?
Yes. Well, you know, interest rates have been so low for so long. And if you think about it, taking into account inflation, interest rates are negative, right? That means 0.2, you know, very low. So what does that mean? It means that this monetary policy is not going to have that much of an impact right now. And so that's where we're turning to fiscal policy in order to do this. And in the long run, I mean, Japan has seen low rates for a long time, and they have a huge debt as well. It's 270% of GDP. And so what you want is you want to see, hopefully, economic growth. I would like to see interest rates go up eventually across time, because that's, I find these are low, but right now, it's not going to, I don't see that happening. So yes, it's interest rates are low. They'll probably be low for the next 4 or 5 years, and negative. They're already negative in some countries around the world, and that means you have to pay. You put your money in the bank, and you're paying the bank to hold your money, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I don't see any change right now.
So there's a question from Sarah Morris Lang. Question is, do you think that we need fundamentally different economic theories models to help us think through these 21st century challenges?
Yes, I actually do. This idea, we create our models, our capitalist society. We created this, right? And what's funny is that when we have these pandemics, everyone asks for money from the government. We need it, especially, big business, etc. But during good times, they say, I don't want any more government. You get away, don't do this. So the question then becomes, there has to be a balance. What is the role of government? We need to think about that. They're not a simple stakeholder. They're a referee. And they're voted by us. They're supposed to be our voice. And so what's interesting to see is that whole system, in thinking about what the role is, and the social value of it, keeping society together and having a vision of where the country is going. I look at New Zealand, and I'm always in awe of these women, New Zealand and even in Germany and in Taiwan. So they're really showing empathy, thinking about what we are, who we are. And that empathy is what gives us and sort of rallies people around us. And I think that's very important.
Okay. So there's a question regarding the role of the private sector. So Rodrigo Teles Rios asks, if differences within communities are increasing due to COVID-19, what are the bridges that the private sector should be building in their communities to help the stakeholders?
Yeah, this is, and I think that the government has tried to do this. Look, no business wants to fire their employees. Nobody wants to. So that's a really important thing. And what businesses are just trying to innovate and how to think about doing what they're doing in a different way, but keeping most of their employees if they can. And their role is to be innovators, to think about, okay, how can we change this thing? Working with government, how do we work and deal and sort of bridge this? Last talk I heard on Tuesday, they were talking about that there was a need for more empathy, more connection. And so these students got together and they started a business where they're talking to older people. They're contacting them saying, hi, how are you? How can I help you? So the business is the interconnection, using technology to try to connect where it's difficult or you can't connect. These are all the things we can do. And thinking into the future, if these things happen more and more often, how do we increase community connection? How do we get information out there? How do we get information that's factual, that it doesn't divide, but sort of bring people together?
So there's an interesting question from Sarah Awaki. Could you comment on the existence of a, in quote, she session, and how disproportionate impacts on women workers could potentially be mitigated in the future?
Yes. Many women, if you look at the unemployment numbers, and I was looking at them, many of those people who are unemployed are women. And that's because they work in restaurants, they work in many different industries where they're let go, they're administrators or secretaries, etc. And so these are things that are that we need to think about. Is how do we think about where women work, how to protect them? In daycares, for example, that's closed down. How do we get resources to them? And so this is something that we have to think about where women are, where they work, and how to actually protect and get them more resources in their jobs to see how to change the type of job they do. And that, again, that comes from the digital divide too. I mean, teachers could be doing a lot more if there was more, the digital environment was stronger in connecting to their students and doing this during an environment like that we're experiencing right now. And so these are all opportunities, but there are systems in the back that need to be addressed before the women start really shining in some of these environments.
Okay. So there were some specific questions regarding some of these programs. So Taslima Rashid has a question whether the CESB is applicable for international students.
No, I don't think it is. I know I was expecting that question. What they've done, though, is they've allowed international students to do more than 20 hours of work a week. That they've allowed. Now, if there are no jobs, then that's a problem. But what that allows is if they're in a university and there are positions, maybe that's one way to help international students. And that's always, and again, that's a political question, and they've had to deal with. But I would encourage you to look at. I think it goes up tomorrow to look at what their requirements are. But I don't think that at least for the $1,200 to $1,250, it doesn't apply necessarily to international. You have to be a resident.
Okay. So you had mentioned something about the developing economy, especially about Ghana. And this question is related to the relief because we see that in a lot of developing economies, a large part of the economy is the informal sector. So we don't know who to give the relief. So what would be your suggestions as to deal with that informal sector in terms of dealing with this COVID? Excellent
question. This is one thing that you're right, 90%, I think the market in Ghana is informal, and that's one of the reasons. So what they have is the NGOs now. This is the link between government and the NGOs. There are community groups that link to this, and they're different ones, and somehow go into that, find out who the leaders are in these NGOs who deal with this informal sector. Sometimes it's very scattered, but there are ways of doing this. So when this is all over, maybe form an organization that talks about it. The Grameen banks, what system do they use, for example, to get funding through this informal sector? So try to connect through that. And I think Jeff Kistruck spoke to that in entrepreneurship. How do people get involved? How do they interconnect? And I think those interconnections need to be established, and the government needs to start establishing links to that. And also with indigenous communities as well, those links and those organizations. And I think what's going to happen is more organizations afterwards are going to start coming together and saying, we didn't have a very strong voice and communicate with government. How can we form this organization to have that voice if this were to happen again?
Thanks, Irene. I think we are almost out of time. So there are a few other questions, but I think you'll be able to see them later on, and if you want to respond. So at this point, I'll request you to make some concluding remarks, and then we will end the session. Thank you.
I will do that. So if I can share my screen again. So I want to end with a poem. You see my poem?
Yeah.
It's a poem by John O'Donoghue, and it's from the Benedict's Book of Blessings in 2007. And it goes like this. This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape your heart, all sense of yourself, and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good. and you will find your feet. Again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginning. So be kind, be generous. We will get through this. And this is what I'm saying from as an economist. We will get through this. We will. And I wish you all the best. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me at ihenriquez@schulich.yorku.ca. And I hope that I provide at least some hope that this will be an interesting, hopefully in the future, we'll find out more interesting economic models that will be able to handle this. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Irene. So on behalf of myself and everyone who spoke, thanks again for this very stimulating session and answering a lot of interesting and wide-ranging questions. I'll close now with a couple of things. First, I would like to bring to your attention the next webinar, which will be on Tuesday, when we'll be welcoming Professor Ellen Oster, who will discuss how to navigate ultra-dynamic change through the concept of fragility. Finally, I want to reiterate that Schulich continues to be open and open to respond to any queries you may have regarding this webinar series or the programs or the current programs or admissions and so on. So please feel free to contact us through these sites or through various social media platforms. And so I think with this, we will end the webinar. Thanks again to Professor Irene and for everyone for joining us, and hope to see you all again next Tuesday. Thank you.